Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
Yep. We're talking about the grand melee and combined arms today and how it's actually shaped up in the tournament meta scene, what people are actually bringing.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic. Again, now that we've gotten quite a few games at our community from after an RTT and a 2-day event at Palm Springs Open, we've seen a whole bunch of games. And so we wanted to dive in and talk about not just specifically the 1.5 updates, we've been talking about those a lot and how that's affected the FAQ and other things, but the other side of it, which is the match play guide, which bam, all landed all at the same time, these fantastic updates. And actually, I'm really, really happy they all landed at the same time. It certainly made our lives easier as event organizers and such and the community to have these all together, which has been great. But it definitely affected things. So before, our community, like most of the communities out there, we're using a rule of three version for the game in terms of that was the only kind of comp restriction we really had at all. Because again, we've always wanted a light touch. We've always wanted to, from at least our standpoint of Old Religions, is what are the fewest rules we can touch that players are excited and happy to show up to the events. Otherwise, we want to use as much that GW has provided as the official rules out of the box, out of the core rule book. That's still our position. So now that we have this match play guide, we're like, cool. What are the fewest things we can touch? Let's embrace as much of the match play guide as the community is excited to embrace, and they're very excited to embrace most of it. And in particular, we switched over to their army compositions. Like, okay, let's retire our rule of three and let's use their grand melee and combined arms, and let's see what happens. So, Evan, why don't we walk players through who aren't as familiar with it? What are those two things together? How did they play out for the match play guide?
So first of all, the grand melee is just a limitation that's being placed on spending too many points on any one specific unit. That's the 25% of your army's total on a single character or a single unit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting here is that basically two different things got affected. It's generally the Lord level kind of dragon mounted characters at the 2,000 point game that were often 550 or 600 points. So now they have to be at 500 or under, which limits their power level and effectiveness because in this game, one of the reasons why characters are so good is because of being able to stack so many different abilities and items and things on the same model. Whether that's a Mark of Chaos and an Ogre Blade or whatever, being able to combine everything into one character is what makes it so good. So limiting that to 500 points on a character, something like that, is very interesting and has changed the meta quite a bit, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. But also, limit 25% on a single character. I'm sorry, single unit, and that has changed the meta a lot. In that a lot of people were literally liking to take a massive unit of core that was like, let's just say like 30 black orcs, so that you could just easily pop over the 500 point limit, and then you have all your core. Well, now you can't really just take a single unit as your entire core slot unless if it's 500 on the dot, because if it's 501, it's illegal, and if it's 499, it's also illegal. So more often than not, we're seeing multiple core units now, whereas people were potentially interested in taking 550 points of Longbeards, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then this,
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting. I think, Evan, to your point, like we were just talking about this even before we started recording. It's like, hey, they had this great restriction on the Wizards, but honestly, with all the other changes that they made in 1.5, we're not actually sure that this really was needed at this point because of all the other changes. But
yeah,
we don't really know because we've already seen them being embraced by the community, and we are very excited that already we're seeing a whole bunch more level ones and level twos. So this certainly doesn't hurt, but definitely that 25% on a single unit, not as much applicable to a single unit, very applicable to single characters. And we'll dive into that once we get to the next section. So that's the grand melee portion. So you could pick and choose. Hey, just want to use grand melee? Cool. You want to use just combined arms? Cool. Our community, and we believe most communities, are likely embracing both. And that's what we've been doing for the past month or so.
okay. And then the second limitation is a little bit weird now because it's nowhere near as the kind of issue it was before. But there is a
No.
limit on wizards where you can only have 0 to 1 level 3 wizard for every 1,000 points, or 0 to 1 level 4 for every 2,000 points. The dreaded double level 4 list that was popular, or even triple level 4 list that was popular amongst Empire players, Tomb Kings players, and such like that, is really not what's happening anymore. If anything, taking a level 3 with Lore Familiar seems to be pretty common as your backup wizard, so that that guy gets to know the 3 very specific spells, and he doesn't really need to know the 4th spell or anything like that. And now that the level 4 upgrade, the only thing it does is let you know and cast 1 additional spell per turn. It's not necessarily the kind of thing people need every single time, especially if they buy a Lore Familiar. So I think that this latter restriction is going to be almost an afterthought now, and whereas previously it was a pretty big meta-defining change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
so that's the Grand Melee.
Yeah.
Now we have combined arms.
So combined arms is just a more complicated version of rule of three, which doesn't clarify that many of the specific edge cases that will immediately come up. But what it's doing here is it has rule of three for characters and special choices, and then core, which many people were playing as rule of six. I have no idea where they came up with that idea. Having six individual razor gores running around is very annoying. I do it. I only ever take two or three. Having six is nuts. But they said rule of four for core units, which is perfectly fine. I don't know why anyone needs to have more than four of like Illyrian Reavers or Dark Riders or something. And then you have 0 to
Mhm.
2 for rare and mercenary units. That also feels perfectly reasonable. Now, a lot of the rare units in the game were already, like, let's say, like 0 to 1 per 1,000. But if you looked at the combined arms rules here, there's no per 1,000 or anything on this restriction. This is just in general. So if you played a 3,000 point game, you would still have a 0 to 2 on your Hellblasters or something like that. Um,
Yep.
However, it does go on to explain here that you ignore these rules if you're restricted in any other way. So, for example, a cannon, and what the example I just used, a Hellblaster, is not a great example of this because they have their own restrictions of how many you can buy per 1,000 points, and you use those restrictions instead of these rules, which means that an Empire player can take 6 cannons to a 2,000 point game, even though that would be 6 special choices because they're 0 to 3 per 1,000 points in the main army list. And then it also specifies here that detachments don't count. What it doesn't address whatsoever are two things that we did address in our FAQ. The first one was, what if you have like a rare unit like the Cathayan Lantern that is also a
Mm-hmm.
mount for a character? Is it
Mm-hmm.
0 to 2? Is it 0 to 3 because one of them can become a special choice? Is it 0 to 6 because you can have 3 on the character and 3 in rare? Is it 8 because you can have 3 as the Lord Magistrate, who's the one kind of character, and then there's the other like hero level guy, and he's a different kind of character, and then you have the rare ones, so that would be 8. I don't know. And what we ended up coming up with is, look, if you take whatever like the core section of the army, so that would be the core special rare limitation that you got up to, and you have that as your
Yep.
total, including character mounts. So that would end up being 3 if your general was a Lord Magistrate. If that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
so this is the one tweak that we made for our community. We did poll and discuss this with our community because we did not feel this was clear, and we were also concerned about this. While we think there's tons of great stuff here in the Match Play Guide by GW, and so excited that they released this, and hopefully this becomes a continual thing that they evolve and update. I don't know if they're going to do it every year, maybe every other year, maybe once an edition. It's not very clear. We are seeing them in their other gaming systems, whether it's 40K, right, AOS, or Horus Heresy. They have a more frequent yearly release, so it's possible this is the first one, but that's not clear yet. Also, because they didn't call it like the General's Compendium, they didn't give it the same naming terminology. It's not clear whether they wanted to follow that same pattern or they wanted to blaze their own pattern or maybe have a slower release cycle. But that being said, the one tweak that we did discuss was, as Evan said, was making sure we are restricting it to whatever that slot is. So there's a couple really good examples out of the gate of that. The Cathay Lantern is a really good example where you can take your rare slots, but then if you take the character, you could take one in special. Suddenly you have 3, and we're like, okay, 3 makes sense because the whole point of the character is to take in a 2,000 point game one additional one. But then you could also take 3 of those characters and put them on the lantern as well, and suddenly you could have 6 lanterns. And we don't need to play a whole bunch of games to know that playing against 6 lanterns, whether it's competitive or defeatable or not, we know it's not going to be a fun experience for the other players. So we're just like, nope, this is not what we believed the intent was. Now, again, it's possible GW did imply that, but we think this is an oversight. And it's also not specific to just Cathay with the lanterns. This would also be the same thing with vampire counts and the Terrorgeist, right? Where before players could field lists of 5 or 6 Terrorgeist. We do not believe that is good for the game. We do not believe that's fun for the community. So that is the one tweak we have made for our community based upon conversation that. So you'd still get the benefit where you had that Cathay character. Again, you could take one more than an additional rare slot, same with the vampire counts, but we are restricting it to 3. So whatever the slots you put them in, those slots they're in, whether they're characters or not characters, we feel this is a healthy event ruling, at least for our events, and we'd recommend other communities look into that as well.
Yeah, and then the a little bit less complicated one is that when you have a unit that is like 0 to 1 per 1,000 as a core unit, but normally it's a special or a rare choice, how many do you get to have then? And we pretty much just said that you could have whatever the limit of like the most unrestricted one was, and that would be the total limit. So if, for example, you have a handmaiden as your general, you can have a single unit of Sisters of Avalorn as a core unit, so that's one. And then because it's a core, then that means you have like 0 to 4, so you have 4 total. That seems perfectly fine, especially because the handmaiden general now is actually a lot worse than it used to be, while only having leader spade across the whole army, because the noble can't just
Mhm.
be a backdoor general for you or anything. Um,
Yep.
yeah, but then I think people are still a little bit concerned, and I particularly am that there's nothing in here that says you can have less than 50%, spent on characters. There's nothing in here that says that you should have not like filling up your entire core slot with like some special or rare unit that just magically got to be in there.
Yeah, so I think that let's dive into that. So we saw finally revealed what GW was going to put in this packet, and we're also excited that they made it and it's released. But there was a lot of speculation of other potential changes they were going to make, such as restricting character limits by a little bit more, in particular because people were speculating of what they saw at the Nottingham events that they run over there. Were they going to follow everything that they'd done in that list? How different were they were going to be? A whole bunch of rumors out there, and we see that actually feels like, well, this is good, still feels like a very light touch, because at the end of the day, while there are some good, healthy restrictions here, it's not that heavy-handed, is it, Evan? Right? Especially because they didn't change characters at all, which seems to be the one that comes up the most often when players are asking for more comp restrictions.
Yeah, so I personally think that it doesn't really matter what army you're playing. The difference between a casual weekend, friendly game and a high competitive game is that percentage of your points spent on characters and what items you took. Um, Specifically, the kind of things you can fit in there if you're just allowed to have 1,000 points in characters is absolutely mind-boggling in some armies, and in others, you're like, I don't even have that many good things to take, so this is terrible because I have to fight against really powerful super characters, and I have nothing that I can fight back against them with. Okay, so what we're talking about is the character percentage limits, and I'm just talking about the difference between a really powerful list and a hey, let's all just have fun together list. And I think it's almost always how many points do you spend on your characters, and why is that the case? Well, in
Mhm.
general, if I'm looking at like I'm playing Beastman or something, I can just put a Wargore on top of a Tuskar Chariot, and now he has toughness 5 and more wounds. And as soon as I give that Wargore some armor and some ward saves, he's now incredibly durable compared to just a regular Tuskar Chariot. So he outfights multiple Tuskar chariots for the same number of points as like 2 or 3 of them. He's way better than they
Mhm.
are. And
Yeah.
challenges are very often a way for characters to avoid taking damage as much as they are a way for the unit to avoid or to win combat against them. And so when you can get charged by, let's say, a big block of like ogres or something, and say I'm only going to have to fight your champion now, that's
Mhm.
a pretty big deal for a way for a character to just avoid taking damage, right? So I personally find that whenever I'm playing casually, I try to limit myself to play under like a 30 to 40% character limit, because that's how you get a game that feels more like Warhammer out of the textbook, where you're just looking at, oh yeah, that's what it looks like, right? And when you play at a high tournament level, it's almost always, in fact, this is the Palm Springs Open was one of the first times I did this. You almost always, get something like 900 or 1,000 points of characters, right? In particular, there would be no double dragon or triple dragon competitive list if you couldn't have 1,000 points of characters, because you really need 2 guys that are 500 points each sitting there. And then if you have a Warpfire Dragon, for example, you have a third one. So there would be no scary multiple dragon. How the hell do I ever deal with this list if there was no 1,000 points characters?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest one coming out of the gate in terms of looking at the comp packet, what we're seeing at events, how things have changed. Right, the big bad scary thing before in the meta, at least one of, or at least if not the biggest, was the Chaos Lord fully decked out on the dragon that was nearly unkillable and could. He was a truck that would just steamroll everything he ran into. So now that he is not removed from the meta, but he's no longer the unkillable machine that he was, because he either has to be offense focused or defense focused, because at least that one change of capping 25% of your total points list in a single character is a great change. So that's fantastic. So he definitely was hit pretty significantly. But now we're seeing, okay, what's the ripple effect? And as I was telling Evan before we started recording, this is always been true in all the other game systems, still true in Warhammer the Old World as it will be in everything. Once the meta shifts, right, and the big bad of the meta is dealt with, cool, that's gone. You cut off its head. Well, now the next big bad that was just beneath it steps up and takes its place. And sometimes it's exactly what you thought was going to take its place. And sometimes, surprise, it's something you didn't think about, right? So once that apex predator is gone, the next predator is going to step up. And I don't think we've seen all of them yet either. I think it's still very early. And I think we're just having to react and see what we saw at some of our events that we saw in the last month in particular, and the winning lists that we saw our big 2-day GT at Palm Springs Open. I think there are definitely other things out there, scary, spooky things that we haven't seen yet, and we are going to see in the coming months. But what we're reacting to, and certainly the community's reacting to, okay, everyone's like, cool, the big bad apex predator of that Chaos Lord isn't as scary and terrifying as he is, but now, oh, two star dragons, that's a little rough to deal with. 2-star dragons, and the reason why they are stepping up is because they could just squeak in at that 500 point mark and still be very, very powerful, because the characters are on top are really just means to buff the dragon itself with the high elf list, because the star dragon is so powerful and so good, especially with its strength 7, right? Hey, you're taking the melee character on top to really buff its weapon skill, and then you get the regen, or you're taking the wizard on top and you get some sweet magic that's going to either buff that or buff some allied units. So either way, you're still getting these very, very powerful killing machines that are very fast, very mobile, and everything. And so this has led certainly to our community, and we think probably other communities. And this was something that was talked about before. This is not new. Of should character points limits not be 50%? Is 50% character points limits healthy and good for the game? For Warhammer the Old World, you were definitely going to get people on both sides of the fence who have been saying one side or another. We've been saying for over a year now, we are going to wait until the match play guide comes out. We want to see what GW releases. We want to play it a whole bunch first with a whole bunch of games in a big event, poll the community, survey the community, see how everybody feels, and then go from there. We definitely have a lot of players in our community who are saying we think we should take it down to 40% cap. And then we have some players who are more aggressive saying we should take it down to a 30 or 35% cap, which perhaps is too strong of a swing. But we are considering trying, at least in some of our next few events, okay, what if we take the total character cap down to 40%? Again, our goal is always what's the smallest tweak we can make to make the community excited and engaged to want to show up to events, to create the atmosphere they want to play. But our community's been very clear and vocal, and we think it's true for a lot of other communities. Most communities are like, we want to play what GW is presenting us. We want the TOs to change as few things as possible. We really want to play the official formal rules. And so that's always been a challenge for us. So, and I don't know, Evan, what do you think? What's going to happen if we do this?
Well, I think that, so first of all, if I just spit out a couple statistics for people. So I was looking at the rankings based only on what's happened since 1.5. Currently, the armies with the highest win rates are Cathay with a 65% win rate out of like 70 or so games that were in tournaments. It's against other tournament players. They have a 65% win rate.
Very
and
high
the
win
armies
rate.
underneath them are Wild Herd, which is what I was playing, of the Beastmen, who also have a very powerful magic phase with Vile Tides, and the infantry bricks being potentially just better than they used to be, at like a 58% win rate. And also the Creation Warhost, another army that I like to play a lot, where the White Lions were given, not only when you charge them, they fight in 2 ranks, but they have Furious Charge, so when they charge you, they've got 2 attacks each. So I think that there are a couple armies here that got a pretty decent glow up, and at the very least with Cathay, there's a correction bias of people not knowing how to play against it, right? So they don't know
Sure.
what to do with it, and they
It's
haven't
new.
even brought units to play against it. But for now, I think that we are going to be seeing a shakeup of what's at the top from what you want to play. And that if you drop the character down to 40%, the only thing that does is take all of the strongest things in the game and make someone have to take just a little bit less of them, and turns the volume down on that really loud music that is playing. And so you can just have a nice conversation with the other player, right? I think that having, kind of the overpowered or over spammed units in the game can often just feel a little bit like noise that is keeping you from enjoying that nice harmonic music that is at the core level of the game there, and it kind of gets in the way. And so I think that's just turning that dial back just a little bit. And so with 40%, right? It's easy to say, well, it's only 10% difference, but at a 2,000 point game, that's 200 points, 10%, right? And that means that instead of 1,000 points of characters, you have 800. And with 800 points of characters, you very often, first of all, you're not taking 2 dragons, I don't think. Even exalted champions on them with like no upgrades are probably not going to fit. And so you're going to have to take something else. Also, for example, for my Beastman list, I can't have a level 4 and a BSB and a really melee focused Beast Lord and a level 1 Vile Type Shaman. I would have to drop one of those
Right.
things at the very
You'd
least.
have to make some choices. I think
Yeah,
that's the biggest
perfectly
difference
fine.
of 50% with everybody's army right now. When you have 50%, which for the most part, competitive lists are going to take 50% because your characters in this version of the game are the most powerful things in the game, are your character choices, in particular because they're riding behemoths and they're combined profiles. Those two things together, characters are the most powerful things on the tabletop. And effectively, 50% of your list, taking that, you have enough points to take basically one of all the major characters. I'm going to take my big melee guy, I'm going to take my big wizard guy, and I still have plenty of points to take my BSB, and usually enough extra points to take something else as well. And I at least had one behemoth, one at least monster, someone writing something there, and that's really, really cool. But basically, you kind of get to take everything you want to take, even in a 2,000 point game, and even just if we reduce it by just that 10%, just down to 40%, suddenly you're not going to be able to take everything you want. It's going to shake things up.
Well, and not only does it mean that you don't spend those points on the character where they're almost always kind of the immediate and obvious thing to spend it on, but instead you have 200 extra points to spend on special units or rare units. Like one of the things that I find the most annoying about the way that the kind of the core point spread usually is the 50% characters, 25% core, 50% special, 25% rare was okay. If I actually am taking 1,000 points of characters and 500 points of core, then special and rare are the same thing because
Yep,
I only had 500 left. So whether or not a unit was in special or rare, it didn't matter whatsoever. They were the same exact thing, right? And that was
exactly right.
kind
This
of
is a legacy
lame.
issues, right? Because the game used to be
Yeah.
intentionally, if you recall back in the day, it used to be 25% characters. 50% is twice as much as you used to be able to take. And it was off in many editions, it was 25%, not all, they changed from edition to edition, but it was 25% characters often, 25% core, 25% rare, then up to 50% special. But exactly right. What's happening right now, because this edition is 50% on characters. Well, for the most part, everybody takes cool. Half my army's characters. I have to take a quarter core. Well, the next best thing is typically going to be my rare units. And in fact, I almost never take special. Like we just don't see it because that's how the composition works out. So we're not suggesting we go so far deviant from the GW rules. We don't want to do that. But even just that 10%, we think actually will create a lot of healthy tweaks that will give us some good adjustments.
Yeah, so like if you're playing vampire counts, you can have 800 points of a vampire lord. Maybe he's on a horse, I don't know, or maybe he's on the zombie dragon. You have a
He'll be on a
necromancer,
dragon.
right? And then maybe you can't fit two banshees and a BSB. Maybe you can only fit the BSB or the banshees or only one of those two things. And then you've got your 800 points, cool. Then you have your 500 points of core, great. And now if you have 700 left, you can't have it just be Blood Knights. If you have to have Blood Knights, and then what else? What are you going to spend the 200 points on? And that's kind of cool because then you got to go look in your closet and find some stuff and be like, oh look, I guess I've got a corpse cart. Let's throw that on the table, right? So having this limit, it actually creates more opportunity as opposed to less in some people's minds. And people who aren't
Yeah.
going to just take those units if they're not given a reason or a restriction to be forced to spend points in a way that's more like spread out and useful, then they're not going to do it. So if you give people a
Yeah.
reason, then you kind of put those guardrails in place. And there are people out
Yep.
there who are playing a much more casual armor list that they're probably already in this mode anyway. So these restrictions are
Yep.
usually only hitting the people who are going the most abusive or the most skew, if that's usually what people call it.
Yeah. Well, not abusive. I'd just say
Yeah.
competitive. They're taking what they see out there are the most competitive lists, which is totally fine. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But exactly right. And effectively, but what's happening with the very competitive list, it becomes auto choices. Well, clearly this is the best choice, the best choice, the best choice. Okay, I really don't have that many points left, so I'm gonna, here or there. But if you now have to spend some points on special because you can't put them on characters anymore, or more additional core, this is actually going to create, in my opinion, more interesting choices. Hey, I can't have every type of character I want, so I have to make an interesting choice. Hey, I do have some points I can't just spend on more rare or characters, so I have to spend on more core or special. These are some interesting choices. So, in the example that you said, as Evan of the vampire counts, maybe I take some Vargeist, right? If I can take some special, maybe I take some Black Knights, right, instead of the Graveguarder, right? Or maybe I take a second unit of Graveguard, right? It definitely opens up, I think, a lot of interesting rosters. So I think this is something that our community's been asking for a while. We were very reluctant to do because we wanted the match play guide to come out, but now that it's out, it is something we're going to be looking at experimenting with over the next few months. and see what happens, and then report back to everybody what the results are.
Absolutely.
But it's not just characters. So we've talked about characters quite a bit with the army composition
Yeah.
and the grand melee. So let's talk about other aspects of it, other things that we've been seeing. Core seems to be typically the same. Players are, for the most part, we've been
Well,
seeing taking that 25%.
yeah, I mean the match play, and again, a lot of people are going to be divergent on this because we immediately saw some issues with this and we moved away from it. So the match play guide says you can only control an objective if you have a unit strength 10 and you're a core
Hmm.
unit. And there's a big problem with that is that some armies have Black Orcs as core or Graveguard as core, and other armies are like
Hmm.
Empire, where it's like, oh, the Great Swords? Nah. So they just can't do it. And it's like, well, then why would I ever bring them ever? You. Gross. And
Yeah.
that's just weird to me personally. I just don't get that at all. Having it be core only. Now, the one thing it does do is it actually puts a huge onus on people to exploit those differences between the armies even more and to not take units like Swordmasters of Hoeth, for example, because, oh, well, if the infantry's only job is to hold objectives, well, they can't do that. So what the hell's the point, right?
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
and then the unit strength 10 thing is a bit annoying for a few reasons. First of all, unit strength 10 is great if you're infantry because you have a lot of guys for pretty cheap. And it's great if
Hmm.
you are cavalry because you can get 5 models and they can still be moving around pretty quickly and effectively. And that's a pretty useful sized unit. If you're Knights of the Realm, if you're Illyrian
Yep.
Reavers, 5 models. Great. It sucks if you're ogres because they're unit strength 3 each. So that means if you have 3 guys, they're unit strength 9 and they cannot hold an objective at all. They are worthless. And if you buy the 4th guy, that's usually as big as my ogre units ever get. And if one guy gets killed, then they're useless. It's like really annoying, to be honest.
Yeah, for monstrous infantry, it definitely doesn't seem to be catered to them. But that's, I think, a theme we've been talked about multiple times
Yeah,
in multiple episodes now about 1.5 fantastic updates to infantry,
yeah,
great updates to the game. It felt like monstrous infantry, ogres, trolls, minotaurs, were left behind in the 1.5 update. It felt like there were missed opportunities to give them a little bit of something. There were multiple ways to approach it, and hopefully, this is something we will see addressed in the future. And we've seen other communities taking more house rules, right, in terms of finding ways to improve those things. Again, we're trying to stay as close to the GW core rules as we can, but it is
right.
something I would very much like to see, and I think the community would like to see GW addresses. Hey, help out the monstrous infantry a little bit more because we didn't see a lot of them before, honestly, even with the before the 1.5 updates, and the 1.5 updates actually leaves them even further behind. I really miss seeing some of those big bricks of ogres or minotaurs or trolls, and besides dragon ogres, right?
But
We're
they're
not really
cavalry.
seeing the big guys, right? They're cavalry, so we're just not seeing them hit the table. So it feels like that's a problem if we're not seeing people take them.
Yeah, and so it's a clear indication that the rules are not exciting an interest in putting them on the table. And so unit strength 10, right? Well, guess what unit strength 10 is? It's 5 models of fast cavalry like Glade Riders or Illyrian Reapers or Goblin Wolf Riders who can have
Mhm.
rules like whether they can do quick turns or skirmish or sprint, and or do marching columns, or if they have reserve move. So if a unit of Goblin Wolf Riders comes on the table from ambush, they can move 9 inches and then they can move 9 inches again because they have reserve move, and that leaves them in a
Really
great
powerful.
place to be an incredibly cheap unit to say, I'm just going to come on the ambush. I don't care if I show up turn 5. I'll stand next to your baggage train and you better be able to kill me. Because if you can't, I get to destroy your baggage train for 250 victory points, or I can go and grab the objective. Um, what Eric, who won the Palm Springs Open, did constantly was had his Illyrian Reavers just sitting somewhere, like behind a forest or behind my lines or something, willing and able to either skirmish move 18 inches or to do a sprinting move of like 21 inches or 24 inches in marching column to just touch the objective or touch the herdstone. Because as soon as they're touching it, you control the objective. It doesn't matter whether there's 30 models of infantry who have a banner, have ranks, they outnumber or whatever, and they're 2 inches away. Well, if you have 5 fast cavalry who are just touching something, they get to hold it and you don't, right?
Yeah. And I think
Um,
that wasn't specific to the herdstone. The herdstone is one example, but I think Evan is talking about in general. We see it with the
yeah.
herdstone. We see it with the controlling table quarters. We see it with the controlling objectives. We see it with the
Hmm.
king of the hill. We see it with the baggage train. While there's a lot of very great things in the match play guide and great scenarios, and I think generally speaking, moving towards a variety of different objectives is
Yeah.
great, very healthy for the game. I love that, but there's a fairly big inconsistency between all of those on what units you need to bring and or what scores and or what captures and or how close you need to be, which quite frankly I can tell you being the TO of the event, oh boy, I was those are the biggest questions questions I actually had to
Yeah.
answer all weekend long was, how do I score again? How big is my unit? What do we need to have? Right? Because they're all different and such. And so again, we tried to be very, very close to the match play guide and use it almost out of the book. But it caused a ton of confusion and actually was a
Well, I
challenge
don't
where
know
some
about you,
players were
Mike.
taking
I've been having a hard
different.
time
Yeah.
getting a hold of the book.
Yeah. Oh, well, no, I pre-ordered mine, so I got it right away.
Right. Yeah. I haven't gone to a Games Workshop store in person. They haven't been on Amazon at all.
Hmm.
I haven't got when I've been too busy playing at a game store to go look at their shelves. I haven't gotten my book yet. So if someone has a
You're not
question
alone,
about,
honestly.
yeah,
That was pretty common at the event. I'd say over half the players just couldn't get their hands on it because the stores were just sold out that they would typically go to. Yeah.
right. So if people aren't getting their hands on the book, and by the way, in the match play guide, it does have rules for controlling special feature, objective, the hill, whatever, or the baggage train. The rules for controlling it are actually different on like every single one, and they rewrite
Yep.
very similar text, but they rewrite it over and over again. Instead of just having one place say, in order to control something, here's how it works, and then just referencing that,
It's
they
just
rewrite
really
the same
confusing
text.
that it's different for each one.
Well, it can be slightly different. For example, you can destroy a baggage train if you unit strength 5, which means, and you don't have to be core for that. So you can destroy a baggage train
Nope.
with like a Empire General on a Griffin. You just fly to the back of the table and you say, okay, I'm standing next to your baggage train now.
And I get the logic behind it. It
Yeah.
makes sense. You're destroying it, so anything should be able to destroy. I get the thematic idea behind it, but it is just confusing when that is different from controlling it for scoring it.
Yeah, well, or controlling the ones on the table. And if you are trying to play with both,
Yep.
and at Palm Springs Open, I really made a conscious decision with the missions to say, you know what, I think that each mission should just have one of these, and we can maybe change the victory points of them a little bit to make them worth enough, but not to have three different objectives at the same time, because a lot of people are just going to be completely confused. If there's table quarters and, the two objectives that are right here and here, and then there's
Yep.
also the baggage train, and they have all three of those things going on at once, many non-competitive players will actually just forget about certain things are happening until the end. They might not even have the score up
Yep.
from controlling the table quarters because they just forgot. And so I didn't want that to
Yep.
happen.
Yep. So, but that being said, I think
Hmm.
the we did see players were excited very much. Everybody was happy to do the new objective scenarios
Yeah,
versus just straight killing. So definitely a lot of community embracing that, which wasn't true a year ago. A
that's
year
true.
ago, people were just honestly, we were going to our events and we were trying to do more fancy scenarios, and they just weren't ready for it. They're like, "Hey, Mike, I'm just trying to ramp up, but to learn my army list rules, they were ready for it." But definitely players coming out to the 1 day events, the RTTs, and the 2 day events know their armies fairly well now at this point. They've been playing and building for quite some time. And now they're like, okay, we're ready for more of the objective scenario. Again, kill points are still the primary way you're going to get the majority of the points potentially. But the scenarios are fantastic because they really do promote engaging with the other army versus standing back or dodging them, which is fantastic. But there is a lot of complexity for the variation of them, and this is definitely something we're going to be looking at in the future of can we streamline what counts as a unit that can interact with this scenario versus 4 or 5 different versions, rule sets, which is what the book has. Another thing I learned because players either couldn't get their hands on the book or didn't have it memorized yet on the sheet that I put on every table or in the player packet. I just need to put in the mission. This is exactly how things score with this mission because it's just too much to remember.
I can understand that, but the text you need is pretty long. It's during
That's
each
the
start of
problem.
turn
That's
phase,
why.
a special
That's
feature
why I
can be
didn't put it in
controlled by a
there.
single unit that is a single core unit that's within 6 inches of it, and it has unit strength of 10 or more. It's not fling and it's not succumb to stupidity. If two or more units are within 6 inches, the closest one controls it. If two or more eligible units are equally close, the one with higher unit strength controls it. However, if two or more equally eligible close units are equally close to special feature and have the
I
same
know.
unit strength, if you're going to write
It's
that on every
it's it
mission,
it's a problem. I don't know. I don't have the answer yet, but this is definitely something. And the reason why we're talking about it in this video segment is because it affects army composition. It affects
oh yeah,
what units you are bringing because they do know that you can and will lose games, especially now that you need 300 points because we did embrace that from the match play packet of 300 points to equal a victory. Getting another, it sounds like, oh, it's only 50 points here, 100 points there. When you need 300 points to win, it makes a big difference. Just scraping those extra 100, 150 points out of those objectives, whether you win or lose. And so players are absolutely taking units and constructing their army to make sure they can score those points and engage with the objectives. So I think we're just seeing the start of this in the meta, and I think we're going to see a greater evolution of it in the coming months.
absolutely.
Cool. All right, so we talked about character composition. We talked about wizards a little bit and how players that affect that, but we did a bigger segment of that in a different video. We talked about the objective scoring. Anything else? Any other big topics for the army composition, Evan, you want to go over?
Yeah, I mean, I could just mention that again when we were playing these objectives or missions that we did rule that you could either be a core unit or infantry because it just felt really wrong for like the elite infantry in the game to still have nowhere to be or no reason to exist. It felt weird, especially if people are going to be taking units like hammers or Vestigor or something where it feels like probably they should be able to hold a flag on the ground.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that we're still getting through this for sure with the army composition and how people are playing it. I will say that it seems like there's more often the case that people will take a couple of core units instead of just one 500-point block and some chaff units. They might take 10 orc boys with bows and shields, and I guess they could fire some arrows, and in the meantime, they stand next to my baggage train. I don't see a problem with that. I think that's perfectly useful. Now, in the past, the reason why people weren't playing units like that before was if I have 10 orcs with bows and they hit on like a 5 or a 6 on long range and they've got a strength 3 arrow, well, the chances that they ever kill a unit all the way and get victory points from killing something is really low, especially if the other person isn't taking any units like that at all. All of their units are big and scary and strong. Well, the 10 orcs don't do anything. But as soon as there's a reason for them to exist when there is no target for them to shoot at and they can just hang out, then they can now be in the list. And guess what? That means that when the other player brings the 10 archers with bows, now they can shoot at each other. Everybody wins. We have
good. Yep.
Right? It's not rock, paper, scissors as much as it is like rocks need to have other rocks. You know what I mean?
Yep. But it also definitely helps promote seeing that the army that we want to see on the battlefield, right? That combined arms force, because that really is, I believe, strongly the best way to play the old world is when you're seeing, and that's one of the unique things about old world compared to some of the other games that makes it feel distinct is it's two armies facing off. So anything that promotes that, I'm a big fan of. And I think definitely the 1.5 update and the match play guide were a lot of great steps in the right direction. Really, GW, fantastic job. There are some other opportunities, though, for how this could be improved in the future. So hopefully we're not going to have to wait a whole nother year before maybe we get some tweaks to this. And hopefully we'll see that and maybe an updated match play guide FAQ in the future and such. Cool. So in general, really excited for it. Really excited what's going with the community. Very, very positive vibes. And hopefully we'll see more in the future. Evan, any last closing thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I will throw one more thing at you. I won't just be to stay legendary, but the other thing we tried at Palm Springs Open was that you didn't win your game unless you had 300 victory points more than the other person. And so it took... in other words, that it could be a 600-point swing between I'm losing and I'm winning. So we had an epic number of draws. There was probably, I don't know, like 15 or so draws across the 17 times 5 games. I don't know, like 60 games. So I think that's fine. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't know whether 300 is the right number or not. Match Play Guide certainly suggests that. And when you have victory points helping to contribute, getting to the 300-point, threshold is a lot easier than it might look. So I don't know, but that's something else to think about. The victory points, the scoring, and the way people play. It will change the way the games are engaged with. For example, I don't know whether the really high win rate with the Beastmen Brayherds is going to be mostly because I have a Herdstone. I sit next to the Herdstone. I get 200 victory points and I win. Right?
Makes a huge difference.
But if it's 300 to win, then you can't just do that. You know what I mean?
Right. Yep. So we're going to see how this plays out.
Okay.
All right. So we'll close it out there.